Oh, hello, world. Welcome to Comic Book News. I'm your old pal, Dan Shaheen. Today, man, we're going to talk to somebody pretty cool. We're going to talk to, I'm a little bit nervous because we're going to talk to my favorite cartoonist, living, we'll say, Peter Bagge. The guy's drawn so many things for so many different companies. Like I had him on the show before in a panel with Noah Van Sciver talking about nonfiction comics. That's just one of the genres that Peter Bagge has not just dabbled in, but worked extensively in. The guy's worked for who? Primarily, Fantagraphics was the majority of his work came out through them. But man, he's worked for Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, probably Image, Valiant, and a bunch of others. Not to mention the Weekly World News. Not to mention Sub Pop record albums, not to mention, man, so many other things. Like I can't name them all. So I'm excited to talk to him. We're going to talk to him about what else? Comics, about his comics, but specifically about the upcoming Complete Hate collection. If you haven't read Hate, then you really haven't read Peter Bagge's epic work. This is kind of his magnum opus. Many years in the making. Wonderful stuff. Bridges the gap from black and white into the color era. Documents the Seattle grunge era, if you will, in a way that is not just superficial and not just sort of silly, but like it is fun, like super fun and funny. And that's what I love the most about Peter Bagge and Peter Bagge comics. They make me laugh. On top of that, the guy's also like very diligent and studious about his approach to comics and design and cartooning in general. And, you look at these crazy drawings and you would think that he's a loosey-goosey, nutty guy. It's kind of the opposite. He's kind of like really, really, really locked down in some of his methodologies, but it produces this loose looking work that I just love. Not to mention, the guy has got political opinions that are kind of, outside of the mainstream and kind of in line with myself a little bit. He's a known libertarian. He does stuff for Reason Magazine, Founding Fathers Funnies on top of journalistic comics and bio comics, everything in between. Like, why am I even talking about this guy when I've got him sitting right backstage, right? So let me bring him in right now. Without any further waiting, let's bring in Peter Bagge. Peter, welcome to Comic Book News.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for that kind introduction.
Oh, man, you deserve it because I've been a fan since I was a kid, since I was probably too young to officially be reading your comics, like suggested age range. But the comic book store I grew up working in.
The work I did for Screw Magazine back when you were a kid.
Well, no, that I haven't read. That's, now that you mention it, that's probably some of the few bits of Bagge that I've never seen.
Right.
And,
I think a lot of it did appear once. There was Fantagraphics did this one shot, a collection of various comics that had appeared in Screw over the years, because they like, for example, every issue had a cartoonist did the cover. So people that you would expect, Robert Crumb and S. Clay Wilson, people like that would do comics for Screw. Danny Hellman, Drew Friedman, of course. Drew Friedman's brother Josh was an editor at Screw. When I first started doing work for them, he would be the one that would give me assignments.
So is it just, I mean, I've never seen a Screw magazine.
Okay.
Is
it was a tabloid.
Is it hardcore pornography, or like where would you put it?
But it was also very satirical. It was like a tabloid. It was more like a newspaper, and it would just have like two colors added to the cover, and it very cheap. So the porno pictures in it, they basically, when you would go to their office, there were these big canvas dollies, kind of like those big things that if you work at a post office that they push mail around in. And it was just full of black and white porno pictures that the really crazy publisher of an editor of Screw is this guy named Al Goldstein, who's no longer with us, completely out of his mind. And when he started the magazine, like back in late 60s, early 70s, he bought a whole bunch of black and white porno pictures, and he kept using them over and over and over again. So all of the models were really hairy hippies. And they just used them to death. And but yeah, every issue would have, there'd be a cartoonist on the cover, and there usually be like a 3-page comic strip on the inside. Usually it'd be like X-rated, but with a satirical bent. They was like, once they did, I can't remember what the impetus was. It was Al Goldstein's idea. Goldstein was always feuding with somebody, and I think he ran afoul of like the Orthodox Jewish community for some reason. Okay. So he asked Josh Friedman, who then asked me to do a comic strip. It basically was like an X-rated spoof of Fiddler on the Roof, something like that. It was really vile and over the top anti-Semitic, where they said you can't, like, I couldn't make the noses big enough. And when Josh Friedman gave me the assignment, I said, sure, I'll do it, but why me? You have so many Jewish cartoonists, including your brother, who contribute to the magazine. Why would you ask me? I'm like the least Jewish cartoonist in this magazine. And he said, that's why. He goes, to us, it's very funny that we're having the most Aryan-looking cartoonists do it.
Was it? What would it be? What was it called? Diddler on the Roof? That's
something
immediately
like that. Yes, something like that. I don't remember. It was really vile. I was really proud of the art, though. I thought it came out good.
Yeah.
I mean,
is that stuff exist still?
No, Screw Magazine, I'm sure, went out of business, and he was like Goldstein wound up homeless. His life just really fell apart. Yeah.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah. He had a really strong self-destructive streak. I mean, like he didn't know when to stop when it came to all this feuding that he was doing. And then he wound up, it's a long, messy story. Josh Friedman co-wrote a autobiography called I, Goldstein, which is hilarious. It's one of the funniest books I ever read. But I believe it came out before his life really fell apart. But he just like totally went to war with not just an ex-wife, but his own son. And he would like trash them in the magazine. Like he lost all sense of proportion. Let's put it that way.
Okay. So that was your first published work?
There was like an underground alternative newspaper called the East Village. Now I'm getting them mixed up. There, East Village I guess it was. Way back in the 60s, there was the East Village Other. That Crumb is known for that. Yeah. And then they went out of business. And then something that was a bit more new wavy started in the late 70s, the East Village I. And that was my first published work. So that Screw Magazine, I guess, and High Times. I would do comics for High Times.
Okay.
High Times, and it didn't pay bad. It's weird. It's like it's still that was like in 1980, but compared to what a cartoonist, especially cartoonists like me, what we're generally offered, when it comes to commercial work, it's kind of the same. $200-300 a page, something like that. It was like,
wow, nice.
I know, not too terrible for 1980.
Yeah, juicy. They used to have quite a print run, and they're one of the few magazines that, has survived, and they're even still around to today in some.
Yeah, even like 5 or so years ago, I was doing illustrations for them. Way back in the day when I first started working for him, the guy Tom Forcade or Forsad, something like that. He started the magazine and he killed himself, and I don't know why or how they kept the magazine going, because financially the High Times was a disaster. So I would continue to work for them, but the only way I could get paid was by taking them to small claims court. So I was routinely going to small claims court, where I would win by default because nobody from High Times would show up. The judge was like, right. Who's here to represent the defendant? And nobody. He goes, all right, I rule in favor of the plaintiff.
What typical like stoner behavior?
No, it was ridiculous. I would go downtown to the downtown courthouse, sue High Times. After I sued and won, I then would go to the High Times office and sell them more comics.
And like they forgot about it, or
no, it's like they knew I was suing them. They're just like, whatever.
That's amazing that you would go back to them after that. But hey,
well,
work is work.
I still would get paid. And it was the best money I was making from anybody. So it's just that I had to take that detour to the Manhattan courthouse. Every time.
Okay, so you've done and continue to do magazine, what I guess you would call illustration work on top of your comics work. But I mean, do you consider yourself at your core to be a cartoonist or broader, like an artist, like a graphic artist, I guess, first, and cartooning is just one of the things that you do?
Yeah, no, I would describe myself as a cartoonist. It's a very simple way to describe myself. But yeah, if somebody hires me to do an illustration, sure, if the pay is at all decent, sure, I'll do it. Doing an illustration is actually easier than doing a comic page,
Sure.
It's just one drawing, and instead of a series of drawings that will have to work together somehow. And any other things, I played music, sometimes made a little bit of money off of that. I've written essays, like at the beginning of during the .com boom 20 years ago. There was a publication called Suck, and they paid me very well. Publication was a website. They paid me very well, and it basically I was an essayist. I was just writing these essays for them. They'd send me some.
Yeah, I remember.
But I would illustrate it. I also would do my own illustrations for my articles. But
sure.
Yeah, so I enjoyed that.
No, I remember that. I remember that well. They had some really cool. They had some pretty cool stuff and got some pretty cool artwork in there as well from different cartoons.
Tom Spurgeon used to write for them. Brian Doherty. A lot of people that worked for Reason also worked for Suck. So when Suck went out of business, that's when I started working for Reason, and it was like all the same people. It was very little change. Yes, almost everybody that worked for Suck also already had like full-time jobs working for Reason. So all
right, let's talk about Reason for a second before we get back into your cartooning. Let's talk about well, of course you did cartooning for them. So okay, how'd you get that gig? When and how did you first get interested in libertarianism and who you vote?
Well, I always, I felt that way, and I felt that way. My go-to belief system was libertarian, even before I knew what that word meant, even before I knew there was a name for it. As I got older, by the time I was a teen, and became clearer in my own mind, I had my own opinions about everything that was happening in the news. I would always be shocked to find out that everybody wasn't, or I was just always on the side of freedom. You know, that people,
Right.
everybody, so long as you're not literally hurting somebody else, everybody should be allowed to do what they want to do. And I would always be shocked when somebody I knew, my parents, my brother, friends of mine, I'd always be flabbergasted when they didn't agree with that, when they wanted to ban certain things and behaviors that only impacted, if that much, only impacted the person doing it, at least directly. And it's not like I searched out other libertarians. I never made an effort in that regard. Never joined. Still haven't joined the party, the Libertarian Party. But some people, I think it was especially people reading my comics. A few people asked me if I was. They sensed that just from reading my work. And there was one person in particular, a good friend, longtime friend of mine named Brian Doherty, and he's been a contributing editor to Reason forever. And it was through him, partly through him, that I started working for Suck, and then it was also through him that I started working for Reason. He was shocked that I had never heard of Reason magazine, so he got me a subscription, and I really enjoyed it. I tended to agree, and still do tend to agree with almost everything that's published in Reason magazine. So it's a very comfortable fit for me. And I like everybody that works for it. I've never had personal or professional problems with anybody that works for that magazine. They've all been fantastic. So no complaints.
All right. Do you catch heat among people? Like Reason magazine, as I understand it, and I may be wrong about this, funded by the Koch brothers, right? The evil Koch brothers, who are partial funders of Reason magazine, and a lot of people give heat to libertarians. Myself, I've caught that heat. I've lost friends because I voted Libertarian in 2016.
The Koch brothers are libertarians, so why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
And I think one of them, there's 4 Koch brothers. There's 2. When people talk about the Koch brothers, they're talking about 2 of them, David and Charles. One of them, I think it was Charles, I get them mixed up, passed away. But the one that's still alive, David, he's on the board of directors for the Reason Foundation. The Reason Foundation is a think tank, and they do studies and commission studies, and they publish Reason magazine. And David Koch is on the board of Reason. And I once asked I think I was with them, and I once asked several of the managing editors of Reason if either of them ever not just told them publish this or don't publish that, but even made suggestions. And they said no, not once. They said that it might be different with the foundation itself when they have board meetings at the Reason Foundation, but when the Reason Foundation are having board meetings, they do not talk about Reason magazine. They totally leave the editors completely alone. So if anybody's taking marching orders, they haven't been passed on to me.
Right. And those guys also do a lot of funding for PBS and all kinds of different sort of like I don't know.
Well, I don't.
Public issues.
There are so many people, especially when you're in. People tend to be left leaning in the world of the arts, which I am. I'm an artist, and cartoonists are artists, and so most people I know, most of my peers, tend to be very left leaning, and people who are left leaning, they're allergic to millionaires and billionaires. They just intuitively hate them. I remember my brother was like that, and we used to argue about that when we were kids. I remember my brother, we were like 10, 12 years old. And my brother was like saying, it's appalling that the Rockefellers are billionaires. They should give all their money away. And I was like, to who? Everybody in the whole world? Then everybody gets $1. How is that? That dollar isn't going to change anybody's life. And then you don't have that collective capital that the Rockefellers can use to then give money to who they give with the Rockefeller Foundation. I personally, I don't have any problem with the Koch brothers. I have no problem with George Soros. I know people on the right tend to complain about him. I'll read about what he donates his money to, whether it's political or otherwise. I tend to agree with it. I agree with what Soros does with his money and with what the Koch brothers do with their money, you know?
Yeah. Do what you want, right? It's your money.
That's the other thing, too. And people were shocked when they found out that very often George Soros and the Koch brothers would team up and
I didn't know that.
As a team. They're like, how can that be? But I was like, to me, that makes perfect sense. I agree with both of them. They very much are opposed to authoritarianism, you know, the U.S. government becoming a police state, which it is, you know, and it's becoming more and more of a police state all the time. Most people are comfortable with that. They don't like it when the full weight of the government is thrown at people that they're sympathetic towards, but they love it when it's thrown at people that they don't like personally. You know, I don't like it in either instance. I think it's all unconscionable. But yeah, everybody wants to use the power of the state to punish people they don't agree with or that they don't like, and I don't agree with that.
Yeah, there seems to be a real disconnect with people about not understanding that, like, yeah, if we shut down this person because you don't like their opinion, then you're only safe as long as people like your opinions, right? Like right. That disconnect, that used to be really prominent, especially on the left, right? It was the ACLU, Skokie, Illinois. Right. We hate the Nazis, but we protect their. It has flipped completely from that, and
you know, without nobody at either end of the spectrum seems to. I know it's shocking. It's jaw dropping that people would criticize or talk about making exceptions to free speech because you can't. You either believe that when you say I believe in free speech, it can't be followed by the word "but." As soon as you say "but," that means you don't. You know?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah.
Like for example, it's just an article that not just one article. It's something I've been reading about that just hit the news recently. Is some city, Columbus, Ohio, Columbus, Columbia. I can't remember which city it was, but the city itself passed a hate speech ordinance, which means that if policemen, of all people, if they hear anybody using derogatory ethnic terms while they're, I don't know, walking around out on the street, they can fine you. You know, or if you're being arrested for something else, they can add to your sentence, or at very least, you'll be fined. And so far, only 6 people have been fined for using racially based hate speech. And they're all black, because black people are the ones that throw the N-word around.
More often, for sure. Right. In public, for sure, of course.
Also, there's among certain people, there's this general notion that it's okay for them to curse out white people, but or Asian people, but they're the only ones getting fined for hate speech, which is like, that wasn't the idea. The people who passed it, I'm sure they thought the only people who were going to get fined for it were white people, you know, but no, it was like the opposite.
I mean, how it's not thought police, and like it's really, I don't know, it's scary, and the fact that it doesn't even seem to get on people's radar as a negative thing is a little concerning.
Yeah. I don't know. Okay. Probably everybody's turning this thing off by now.
Now our audience is growing, man. Our audience is growing. People want to hear what Peter Bagge has to say, but I think they want to hear a little more about comics. We're going to get to hate in a second, but let's talk about, you brought it up, so let's talk about music for a second, okay? Tell me about the action suits.
Well, that was, in that cover, the fellow with the beard is Eric Reynolds, who is the co-publisher and editor at Fantagraphics. He's been a good friend of mine for a really long time. So going back to the mid-90s, he formed a band with his roommates, very amateurish, and they mainly wrote all their own songs. And I thought, especially the songs Eric Reynolds was writing, I thought they were really good. So at a party, I just sat in with them on drums because they were all taking turn playing drums. So, and I played drums going back to when I was like 12 years old. So they asked me to keep playing with them, so I did. At one point, this is a weird story. Do you know the cartoonist Al Columbia?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, really good artist. Yeah, he was a roommate of Eric's, and he was in the band. And so they said, yeah, you should be in our band. So come practice. So again, like I said, they all lived in the same house. They're all renting the same rental. And they practiced in the basement. So I came over. We practiced a few songs. And after just playing a few songs, Al Columbia just went, who's a very eccentric character, he just went to, I'm going to go upstairs for a little bit. And we're like, okay. So we went upstairs. 15 minutes go by, half an hour goes by. And I said, is Al coming back? And they were like, well, we don't know. Let's just keep practicing. Who cares? We'll just keep practicing. I go, is this typical of him? They go, oh, yeah, we don't know. He went to his bedroom, and he didn't leave his bedroom for 2 weeks. I am not making this up. And I'm like, should I be taking this personally? Is my drumming that bad? Later on, they said, no, that had... the next time I saw Al Columbia, he said, no, that had nothing to do with it. And I was just going through the thing. I go, but the thing that you went through, it all started with the moment I joined your group.
Right. Okay, well, that's just the beginning, though, or not the beginning, but just part of your musical connection. You've done a ton of album covers for Sub Pop and I guess other labels as well. I want to throw this one up real quick.
Right. Yeah, that's
not sure when this one came out.
That just came out. That's brand spanking new. And that fellow George Faulkner, I've been doing art for him off and on for at least 5 years. And what brought us together was he like me, he's fascinated by Murray Wilson, and he's doing something he's a singer. He sings on this, and he hires very professional musicians to perform the tunes. So that album is great. It's really well done. The musicianship, the production, it is top notch, even though and it's all songs written by Murray Wilson. So for people who don't know, Murray Wilson was Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys' father. Yes. Along with Dennis and Carl Wilson, and Mike Love was his nephew. So he was like the father of the Beach Boys. And he was a very frustrated songwriter. He was obsessed with becoming a successful songwriter. And what he used to do, some of his songs actually got recorded. And you could, if you go on YouTube, you could hear some of the songs his songs being performed by other people. They're all very corny. It's all really gimmicky 1950s. How much is that doggy in the window type stuff? He was always looking for a gimmick. He was a total hack. There was nothing original about any of his songs. They were totally derivative. And but anyhow, George Faulkner, the guy that put out that record, he found that Murray Wilson, when he'd write a song, he would send it to the Library of Congress to have it copyrighted. And so he was accessed, and he would he knew how to write music. The charts were there with the notes and everything.
Oh, okay. So, cool.
So he found at least a couple dozen Murray Wilson songs in the archives, which this is especially fascinating if you happen to know much about the Beach Boys. One of the songs, it said copyright 1952, but it said written by Murray Wilson and Mike Love. Mike Love being the lead singer of the Beach Boys and a cousin, and a lot of hardcore Beach Boy fans really hate him. But what's funny is, what's hilarious about that is Mike Love was writing on Wilson's coattails when he was 11. At 11 years old, he was getting in on this songwriting shtick.
Well, let's get a little taste for the Murray Wilson experience. I got a little clip here, Peter.
Okay.
Can we take it's a short clip? It's just a couple minutes. Take a short break and look at this Murray Wilson clip real quick. I think you're going to enjoy it, folks. Let's check out Murray Wilson.
One step, two step, talk about a new step. It's the Murray Wilson Show.
Oh.
Hey, I got. I'm sorry, that was the wrong clip. That was my short
Fun
clip.
boys singing "Fun in the Sun." Take one.
Fun, fun, fun.
Stop! Hold it! Now, no offense, boys, but you sound like a wino's death farts echoing through a sewer pipe. You're the Fun Boys, remember? And I'm happy, and I'm singing, and a 5, 6, 7, 8.
We'll have fun,
Cut! I can't take this! What you're doing in here is a crime against nature. Do you hate me? Is that it? Do you hate God? And I'm happy, and I'm singing, and a 5, 6, 7, 8.
Fun, fun, fun in the
Stop! Rick, you're flatting. Where do you think you're going? We quit. You can't quit. Your contract forbids quitting. Now get back in there before I pop out my glass eye and make you suck it like a breath mint. Oh, come on, guys. Forget the contract. Do it for the music. Fine, leave. You're all fired anyway. I don't need you. I don't need anybody. I'll show them. I'll finish this record myself. If a social retard like my son Brian can sell records, so can I. Oh, we'll have fun in the sun, or I'm gonna get my belt!
I'm
Hey,
laughing
guys,
at my
if you like-
own.
Great.
I love that. I love that Murray the Rocking Teen. And the music. Like, he doesn't have a clue how to make a rock and roll record, although he did. But, yeah, the story behind that, real quick, is there used to be a short-lived website, again, during the .com boom. It was called Icebox, and it was all free at short animated cartoons. A lot of it was very funny. There was one cartoon called Hard Drinkin' Lincoln that I thought was very funny. What they tend to, and the people who did it, what they like to do is they take a comedian or a comedy writer and team him or her up with a cartoonist or an animator. And so they teamed me up with a comedian and a writer that I already knew named Dana Gould.
Who's great. Who's a fantastic stand-up comedian,
yes,
showrunner on The Simpsons, right?
Dana
really
Gould's amazing. Big comic fan too, and he has a great podcast as well. But they said, "Why don't the two of you know each other? Why don't the two of you come up with something?" And when Dana and I talked, neither of us had a clear-cut idea when we started talking about it. But what we did talk about was we had just seen a brand new docudrama about the Beach Boys, and we both loved the actor. I think Dana even knew the actor. We both loved the actor that played Murray Wilson. He was totally over the top. And we also loved Murray Wilson. We just were like, cranky old men are always funny. They're always funny. You know, Archie Bunker, you know, Red Fox.
Studs Kirby.
We said, do you want to do a cartoon all about Murray Wilson? And we pitched the idea, and amazingly, they said, "Yeah, sure, okay." And we kept wondering, is there going to be pushback from Brian Wilson or anybody from the Beach Boys camp? But there wasn't. The only thing is, we always made Audrey Wilson, Brian Wilson's mother, who supposedly is a very nice lady, but we always drew her being a little bit tipsy. She was like, "Oh, I'm shy." And so people who knew Audrey, they didn't like that, just because they liked her so much and they thought that was disrespectful, you know. But I think Dana met Brian Wilson a couple of times. Well, one of the people that did voices for that was Tom Kenny, who is the voice of SpongeBob SquarePants. And he was the voice of Joe Jackson, Michael Jackson's father. At the time, I was like, well, we got to hire a black actor to play Joe Jackson. And Danny says, no, I want Tom Kenny to do it. And I'm like, Tom Kenny's a white guy. It's just going to sound like a white guy trying to sound black. And Danny was like, yeah, that's what I want.
You literally can't do that anymore.
I probably, well, you know, I suppose, well, you know, you'll get yelled at it for doing that later. But yeah, he just thought, to him, it was, nobody guessed that. Nobody could even tell that it was SpongeBob doing the voice of Joe Jackson. But to Dana, it was particularly hilarious seeing this. Joe Jackson was a very black man in every sense of the word. And
so you got, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, you had Dana Gould, okay. You had Tom Kenny, and who used to be on Mr. Show, one of my favorite shows, and another Mr. Show alumnus in Paul F. Tompkins as the voice of Murray Wilson, right?
Paul F. Tompkins and Jill Talley, who was always on Mr. Show as well. And Jill Talley was the voice of Audrey Wilson. And when Murray tried to produce a girl group, she was one of the girls in the girl group, and she did like almost all the female voices, I think. And yeah, and Paul F. Tompkins, there was nobody else we didn't consider anybody else for a single second. It had to be him. And every time I've tried to, every time I hate or the Bradleys has been in development, the top of my list to voice either Buddy or Pops Bradley or even both.
Pops.
Paul F. Tompkins.
Yeah.
I love Paul Tompkins' voice and just him. The very first time I saw him do stand-up, I loved him. I thought he was such a funny guy. But just everything about his personality, his whole, just the way
He's hilarious.
Just everything. It was like my brain always goes to him whenever I have anything in development. If it's going to be a cartoon, you know.
Yeah, he's amazingly talented. Mr. Peanut Butter. You watch Bojack Horseman?
I haven't. I saw the first season, but I haven't seen it in a while. But he was one of the voices, huh?
Yeah, he's the voice of Mr. Peanut Butter, the dog, in that, and he's just hilarious. So good.
While I'm thinking of it, and now I can't even rattle off all the names, but one time, it's not the last time, but one time when the Bradleys were in development with Fox, we wound up like in a horse race, the way you always do. Like it came down to what would be greenlit, Hate or Bob's Burgers. And they wound up greenlighting Bob's Burgers. But when I would attend meetings for Hate at the Fox offices, it's something that execs love to do this. They would say, who would you cast? They love to talk casting. Normally, especially when it comes to live action, I suck at that. I never look at an actor on TV and say, oh, there's that guy or that woman would be perfect to play so-and-so. My mind never goes there, and I can never think of anybody. You know, I still think of when they say, who do you think would be perfect for Buddy Bradley? Visually, my mind always goes to Bob Denver, who played Gilligan.
Perfect. Yeah, of course. Maynard G. Krebs.
Is he available? Yeah, I always think of if I manage to think of anybody, it's always somebody way too late. It's easier for me to think of people when it comes to just voices, though. I have a much easier time casting people in my brain if it's animation. So while we're at Fox, they said, who do you, me and my writing partner, they said, who do you imagine doing the voices of some of the characters? And we rattled off some names. We said, well, this person would be great. This person would be perfect, et cetera, et cetera. And the people who were listening go, yeah, no, that's great. We didn't get greenlit. Bob's Burgers did. All the names we rattled off are all the voices of Bob's Burgers.
Yeah, John Benjamin. I was going to say, because Bob's Burgers, the voice cast is amazing.
Yes.
But the design and the writing is not my favorite.
Oh, I don't know. I've only seen that show a couple of times. It's not like it probably sounds like I'm avoiding it out of bitterness, and I'm not. I watched it once or twice. I thought it was funny. I liked it fine. I thought it was pretty funny. Yeah. But I don't watch.
That's about the best I've been able to say about it, though. That's about the best I've been able to say about it. That's about the best I can say about it. It's like it's pretty funny. Like I've never laughed the way I laugh when I read a Peter Bagge comic.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
So let's bring it back. Let's bring it back. I have so many other things to talk about, but we're here to talk about one thing in particular. This is the work that you're most known for. It's my favorite comic. It's not just my favorite comic. It's my favorite comic book character. I was thinking about this. At the top of my hierarchy of comic book characters is Uncle Scrooge, Jimmy Olsen, and Buddy Bradley. Okay,
there you go. The big
three. Because each of those characters they're their own person. They're iconoclasts. They do things differently than other people, yet they're good. But they're just interesting and fun, and they don't really get along with everybody very well. And I love that.
Okay, well, good. Yeah, so you've got it up there, this big collection, and I brought down a copy. As you can see, very, very thick. It's 3 volumes that I pulled out. Buddy on the cover and Lisa on the back cover. She's my favorite character.
Oh, okay.
I mean, she couldn't have been the star, but yeah. So then, of the 3 volumes inside, this one is like contains all the early black and white hates from the early 1990s. So that's Stinky, and on the other side is his buddy's roommate
George Cecil Hamilton III, who is in our credits. By the way, all of your characters a lot of your characters are in our closing credits and have been in there for some time as honorary supporters of the show.
Oh, okay. There you go. And then the color hates that came out in the mid-late 90s. So yeah, there's Buddy's
that is
family,
beautiful.
and on the back is his loser high school friends. And then I did, as you may recall, in the I did something called Hate Annual. I tried to get a Buddy story out once a year. So the slightly thinner volume, and plus it has lots of other. It has all these little one-shots and odd things, stuff that appeared elsewhere, some old interviews, those contests. Used to have like the Buddy lookalike contest and Win a Date with Stinky contest. So that's all in this volume. And there's like
how about this one?
Paraphernalia. So, you want to ask about that? That's not in there.
Because that did appear in Hate Annual.
It appered in a regular Hate. It appeared in one of the color hates.
Okay.
And that's a collaboration that was something that I drew, and actually Eric Reynolds, who we were talking about before, he helped me ink it. But that was written by Alan Moore, the famous Alan Moore. I met Alan Moore once a really long time ago. It was 1985 at the San Diego Comic Convention. It was the last time that Alan Moore ever went to a comic convention. And we were on a panel together, and he told me, I really like your comics, which amazed me because I was only just starting out. I only had just started doing neat stuff, but he told me he loved it. And he said, we got to collaborate one of these days. And we would talk every now and then, not face to face, but through the mail. He said, we got to collaborate one of these days. And I said, what do you have in mind? And he says, I want to do a comic about the Kool-Aid Man. And he would just leave it at that. And I thought he was just messing with me. But then, later on, years later, we were talking on the phone. He says, I still want to do that. I go, are you serious? The Kool-Aid Man? I go, why? And he said, well, he goes, we don't have Kool-Aid in England. But every time I go to the States, he goes, it's not the product itself, but the advertisements. I see them in comic books. I see them on TV. It's this big, huge picture of red liquid that's running through walls and literally crashing birthday parties. Yes. And he was not just fascinates me. He goes, this is the craziest thing, the craziest looking thing I've ever seen. And he goes, I want to do something about it. But he goes, I really don't know anything about Kool-Aid Man, though. I don't know if there's what backstory there might be. Meanwhile, at the time, I don't know if this is still the case, at the time, he was computer phobic. He was a Luddite on purpose. This was at the beginning of the internet era, and like 1995, 96. And I said, well, Google it. Or I don't even think Google was around then. I go, Alta Vista it on the internet. I'm sure you can find something. He goes, no. He goes, I'm not going to do that because I don't trust the internet. He goes, you think you're watching them. They're watching you. The people, whoever, the government, corporations, they're watching you. And I'm like, yeah, that's a bunch of commie hippie nonsense. Of course, it turns out he was 100% correct.
On point. Like Alan Moore, as far as like guys making predictions about the future, when I read Watchmen and I see them smoking electronic cigarettes,
right?
And I go like he was like visionary. He really saw it, and even if I don't know if you read Watchmen, this is me going very nerdy on Watchmen for a second, but like he goes, the reason why in the book it was explained there was not enough lithium available to create the batteries, and that Dr. Manhattan could synthesize the lithium. Like he had thought this stuff all out. And that's actually the case. There were major lithium deposits discovered that have made battery technology get better, and that's sort of part of what led. Like he's really thoughtful in that way.
Yes. Well, anyway, just real quick, I found on the internet, I found believe it or not, an article that was, and this was its actual title, Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Kool-Aid and the Kool-Aid Man. So I printed it all out. He said, can you fax it to me? And I said, yeah, sure. It wound up being 50 pages. I sent this 50-page fax overseas. It cost me a fortune because that was like overseas.
That's like that's a lot of money.
It cost me so much money. But he was fascinated by it, and he went to town. It gave him a million ideas.
Fully worth it. Very fun. I read it in a collected graphic novel. I have it in a trade paperback of like Alan Moore's lesser known works.
Okay, so great. And I reprinted it in a collection called Other Stuff for all through even in the 80s, but also in the 90s. I used to enjoy collaborating. I enjoyed drawing something written by somebody else and vice versa. I liked writing something and asking another artist to do it. Of course, it'd be like an artist or a writer whose work I like, but just to see what they would come up with, to see how they would think, how they might do something different from the way I would do it. It was very educational. So in this collection of mine called Other Stuff,
which I have, by the way, I forgot to pull it out.
Yeah, there's a whole section where I collaborate. I have collaborations with Dan Clowes and Adrian Tomani and Robert Crumb and Danny Hellman.
Can you say that name again?
Which name?
Adrian. Well, how do you pronounce the last name?
Tomani. That's how I pronounce it. I think you say the E a little bit. I could be wrong though. I always forget.
Okay.
Somebody will correct me, and then I find myself snapping back. But I'm pretty sure it's Adrian Tomani.
You're teeing me up here, Pete, because I want to look at some of your comics. And, we have a way that we do that kind of thing around here. We do this little thing. Wait a minute. Let me see if I can make this happen. We do this thing that we like to call the $1 Million Comics Cam. Let's check it out. Oh, $1 Million Comics Cam. Are you kidding me? Great. All right. Let's take a look at some of the works of Peter Bagge here. Wait a minute, I'm having mouse problems. Think I can do this? Oh yeah, we can get big, we can get small. So we're gonna look at some of your stuff. We got your neat stuff right here, but also, I threw this on the $1 Million Comics Cam as well. Adrian's new book, which is fantastic, by the way.
Yeah, I have that on order. I still haven't read it. I've read excerpts from it on the internet, but yeah, I haven't read the whole thing. I'm sure I'm going to love it. I think everything he does is fantastic.
I think this is his best. It's the best work I've ever read by him. It's so good. It's so well drawn. And there's a running gag about how you pronounce his last name and he never really reveals how you pronounce the last name. So,
there you go.
I had to bring it up. This is a great book. I recommend. We'll be looking at it on a later show, but come on, we got $1 million guests, so we got to look in the $1 Million Comics Cam right now. I want to look at Hate a little bit. I just want to look through some of this stuff here, Pete, because your style is instantaneously recognizable. There is nobody out there who I'm going to mistake Peter Bagge for. The style is so crazy. It's I think you've described it yourself as like what cartoons meets, I can't remember what you described.
Two-dimensional animated cartoons. That's what I was going for when I was developing my drawing style. Really wanted to make it look like Warner Brother cartoons, especially.
Uh-huh. Well, I don't know that I look at this and I see Warner Brothers right away, but the cartooniness is unmistakable. I've talked about this before with you a little bit, but your process fascinates me for how you lay out a page. Could you tell us just like in a nutshell, kind of your what you do to come up with a page? And we've talked about this before.
Well, for a longer story like this, anything that's longer than one page, in fact, I'll type out an outline, and then based on that, I'll write out an entire script. And I write it out like in a script format too. But then from that, I take printer paper, and with a ballpoint pen, I'll do a rough of each page. What's that? So yeah, I'll just do a rough of every page. And
this is a book plate. I must have got this. I didn't even know this was in here, to tell you the truth. I just found this just now. I love it.
Yeah. But I
And
think
then
what you're
look-
asking about is the stuff I
Yeah.
do with the tracing paper.
Yes.
Yeah, when I finally lay out the finished art on a Bristol board, I'll have all the panels and the panel borders laid out, but I tape a tracing paper to it and I pencil it first on the tracing paper. And then I flip it and look at it backwards and pencil it again, drawing everything backwards with a very dark, soft pencil. And I do that. I have to look at the artwork backwards because it's the only way I could see mistakes. It's like this visual dyslexia that I have where I'll know something is off, but I can't exactly pinpoint it. And as soon as I look at my artwork backwards, then I know what the problem is. And then I'm able to solve all of my problems. The most common thing is just like somebody running or walking, just their weight, where their body weight is. I always need to shift it one way or the other. Otherwise, it'll look like they're about to fall over one way or the other. But yeah, it's just I only know of like a handful of cartoonists that do anything even like that.
It's nuts. When I read it the first time, I'm like, he's full of crap. There's no way he's that seemed so absurdly over the top for what.
Right.
I mean, it's not a loose style. You don't have like a loose style, I guess, but it has the perception of looseness, right? Like
Right.
I guess.
Well, I'll make it when I'm going through this process too. I'll make things wackier and more exaggerated through each step. Like I'll pencil it first on the tracing paper with light pencil, then dark pencil. Then I'm penciling again backwards with the dark pencil. Then I transfer that image onto the Bristol board, and then I pencil it yet again. And each time I'm making slight alterations. I'll move, and that's another great thing about the tracing paper is I can slide the tracing paper up or to the side if I feel like the character should be higher or lower in the panel. So that's another plus to it. Once in a blue moon, I will try to skip that whole tracing paper process. I'll just go straight to penciling on the Bristol board. But I almost always regret it. I could always pinpoint pages where I did do that and wish that I didn't take that shortcut.
So, Pete, when are we going to see more hate? Is there any more coming?
No, that's a funny thing. I just it wound up being a debacle, but I wound up I was asked in a roundabout way to draw a hate story for, of all things, the New Yorker, which I found really strange. I could not see my work in the New Yorker, but I know that the New Yorker paid well. New Yorker magazine, I know other people that worked for it, so I knew they paid well. So I was like, sure, it's not like I'm against the New Yorker, but I was like, yeah, okay. So I drew like a nostalgia strip. I drew this. Well, I didn't draw it. I wrote it. I wrote like the 6-page story about the very first time that Buddy and Lisa met. And I was really happy with the way it came out. But then it's just one thing happened after another. I very much got the feeling that the person I was dealing with at the New Yorker really didn't want to run it, but didn't want to say it. But just the money wound up being terrible, and their edit suggestions were terrible. So it was just yesterday, I just pulled the plug on it. I just said, no, I'm not going to do it. So it wouldn't have come out good.
Oh, no, Peter, no.
The edits were bad. The edits sucked out all the comedy. Here's the thing. To me, and this has happened to me before, to me, a lot of what was being taken out for problematic reasons. I got the editor I was dealing with, she was very young. So she was either things that offended her or that she was worried would offend, and to me, none of it was offensive, but it was just all those hate characters being in character. And it was very odd.
Can you give an example? Can you give an example of like what wouldn't fly?
It's really hard to say because you'd have to know the context. But there was one entire page. It was like the last page. They cut out that whole thing, and it's the only page where you see George, and it's like the character George Cecil Hamilton, and it's when he just comes in and then leaves, and Stinky says to Buddy, "Oh, that guy's gonna be our new roommate," and it was just joke. Of course, they made comments about George being black. Where Stinky told George that Buddy's a racist, but he says, "I only told him that so he'd always like me better." But they cut out that entire page, you know. And then, but they kept, there was like a little tag on, little add-on punchline joke at the end, and that was kept on there. But it made that little tag on joke made no sense without the context of that last page.
Yeah,
it's just like all the setups were getting killed when they cut things out. It's like, well, that doesn't. Everything that you're cutting out, it was leading up to something, and that something that it was leading up to now makes little to no sense, and it killed the humor. It just. But I said, you know, we could do endless back and forth, but that's the other thing too. It was going to pay so little that it wasn't worth it. You know, it just wasn't worth
That's what I'm going like, you're saying in the magazine hierarchy, it's like High Times, then Screw Magazine, and then like New Yorker down here. As far
well,
as
the New Yorker was only going to run it on their website. And I didn't care. They said, no, it's not going to be in the magazine. It'll only be on our website. That was fine with me. But if they were being straight with me, their website pays like 1/10 of what the magazine paid.
Right. So, like, okay, Pete, so we're not going to see it in the New Yorker. Who cares? I don't read the New Yorker anyway, so I don't care about that. But I want that story, man. I want the secret origin of George Hamilton III. Like,
yeah, well,
what are the chances of us seeing that in print someday?
I'll draw it if somebody will pay me decent money to do it. I'll gladly.
I'll pay you how much you want, buddy.
What?
How much you want? I'll make it happen, Pete. How much you need?
I don't want to say online. I don't want to undersell myself. I was certainly willing to do it for New York, what I thought was New Yorker money, but that wound up not being the case.
So you're saying that New Yorker, because I found it interesting in the Tomine, whatever, he talks about how basically his job is a New Yorker cartoonist now. Right. And so like he makes a living and can like live in New York City, I guess. You know, just like drawing some covers and some interior work. So they must pay decently, I'm assuming.
Like, yeah, well, that's what I was always told, is that they pay very well. But yeah, with this only being on their website, the pay was bad. It was really bad.
Do you need to talk
worse than High Times circa 1980 bad? Worse than Screw Magazine 1980 bad.
That's what I'm saying. That's the shocker to me. That's the funny thing. Right. So we're gonna do some Q&A with some viewers. We don't have too many, but tell us before we do that, Pete, when is the Complete Hate dropping? Where should people go?
The official release date, I believe, is December 7th or 8th. That's when it will be available everywhere. Prior to that, I'm going to be doing these virtual book signings. I'm going to do one in New York, one in LA, and one in Seattle. And of course, I'm not going anywhere. I'll be sitting here talking to this contraption just like I am now. And those are going to happen in 2-3 weeks from now, like in late November. And so there'll be copies of the books there, but I guess you'd have to order it from those specific bookstores. I believe it's Skylight Books in LA, the Strand in New York City, and then the Fantagraphics bookstore in Seattle.
Sure. There's tons of places you can get it. It's available on Amazon and everywhere else.
Right. I'm not an expert in how this works, but I don't think, I mean, you could pre-order it from anybody. You could pre-order it directly from Fantagraphics. You could pre-order it from people like Amazon. But I think there's a rule that like Amazon can't send it out before stores can sell it. You know what I mean? Right.
That is true.
So you still will have to wait for the December 7th or 8th release date. I hope I'm getting all this right. I'm pretty sure that sounds like it's only fair if that's the way it's going to be.
Absolutely. Pete, I want to, we've been talking for a while now. I want to, there's so much, you've done so much work. I couldn't even I kept searching and just finding more and more different publications and things. Most of these I bought, but you've done some stuff. Speaking of collaborations, stuff nobody's doing this. Nobody's putting out an all ages girl centric space rock and roll comic. So
yeah, come on, people.
How did this happen? And what were the hopes and where it were like?
Well, this was in the very late 90s. And do you remember? Well, I'm sure you remember how the comics industry had this huge crash around 1993. And especially with mainstream publishers in particular, they had a really long, slow climb back up.
Yes.
Probably more than anything else, it was the movies that put them over the top, the CGI movies. And that wasn't until like 2001, 2002 that those started coming out. So prior to that, they were really struggling. And so that's when I was approached by both Marvel and DC, because Hate was selling well. Hate was like selling as well as like an average Marvel or DC comic, or so I was told. So some people from Vertigo, Karen Berger and another editor, Shelley Bond, they asked me if I would pitch them ideas to come up with something for Vertigo. And at the time, my daughter was like 10 years old. And she always complained to me that she goes, "Dad, do you think once in your life you could do a comic that a girl would like, a young girl like her? Can you do a comic for me?" And so I would like to have come up with an idea. So while I was, and I think I mentioned that to the DC editors, and they said, we'd like to, they said, "We're always trying to do this. We're willing to try it again. We're always trying to get more women and girls, young girls, to read comics." It still was very male centric. And they said, every now and then we'll make a real effort to put out something that will appeal specifically to girls. Usually doesn't pan out. But they said, yeah, we'll try it again. So that was the story behind, yeah. It's not an exact ripoff, but it's kind of a ripoff of Josie and the Pussycats, I'll admit. There's some obvious similarities. So yeah, that was like the biggest ripoff I've ever done. But I also did it too. I didn't want to be too original because my daughter wanted something generic, and she was my practice target audience. I was
plus you're working with Gilbert Hernandez, right? Who's a big Dan DiCarlo fan, I think.
Sure.
And so
yes, and so that seemed only natural.
Yeah.
Well, that was the thing too. It's like I wanted to try my hand at doing something all ages. Like it was even my idea. I even insisted that be approved by the Comic Code Authority, and I made this absurd vow to myself. I said, I'm going to write a comic where whoever the Comic Code Authority is, they'll never have to censor or redline a single thing. And it's true. I mean, it's a stupid thing to be proud of, but not once did anybody say you can't do this, you can't say that.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I just wanted to see if I could do something totally square.
Okay.
And but anyhow, they insisted that, like, every time. Later on, I did Sweatshop for DC, which was a monthly comic. They insist that these books come out monthly, and I can't write and draw a comic monthly. I can't work that fast. So for that reason, I had no choice but to work with collaborators. So the Hernandez brothers were the obvious choice to do to illustrate. Yeah, and Gilbert agreed. I think Gilbert's wife Carol, she really liked the idea, and I think she browbeat Gilbert into doing it. I think it. Well,
do you know how entitled you sound, Peter? Do you know how entitled you sound when oh yeah, the perfect guy was Gilbert Hernandez, so I just called him, and sure, he signed on right away.
Well, no, it wasn't that easy. I think his wife really wanted to do it, and I totally understood why. With it coming out monthly, it kind of took over his life. I mean, he has his own comics, he's doing Love and Rockets and other things, so he seemed a little bit miserable the whole time, having to crank out this monthly comic that wasn't even his.
Well, let me tell you, you guys, I think we're a little ahead of your time, because I could easily see something like this coming out now from a Scholastic or many other of the young adult or all ages imprints.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, the comic didn't sell, so that's why they canceled it. After only 9 issues, they canceled it because the sales were not good. The ironic thing is, it was after that. It was a few years after was canceled that young women and girls, did start reading comics in much larger numbers, and that was because of manga comics.
Yes.
All of a sudden, middle school girls went manga crazy. And then when they outgrew that, they started reading other comics. But just about every woman under the age of 30, maybe even 35, I bet almost all of them would say that they got into comics via Japanese manga comics, and then started doing their own comics and reading alternative or mainstream stuff. So now there's a lot more, not just female customers, but a lot more female artists now who are doing stuff for young female readers. Yeah, it might have, who knows, it might have done better. I don't know.
And being influenced by manga lets them draw from such a broader base of genres and materials that manga is typically depicts than, say, your typical superhero American fan who's just going to like draw guys in tights.
Right.
I think it's a great trend.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me a little bit, when we got to get out of here, Pete, but tell me, I heard recently, we talked about your books, your biography books, but I heard you recently saying this has become now one of your best sellers. Tell us a little bit about your work for Drawn and Quarterly and these biographies, because last we talked, you had said that you said at conventions this is one of your best sellers, I guess, but you had said like the sales, you weren't sure yet about the sales on these books. So tell me how these are doing
well, that one, that one's other than Hate and Hate Collections, that was the best-selling book I'd ever done. Got reprinted. And then I did 2 more for Drawn and Quarterly. I think each one sold less than the other because at this point I probably won't. It's not worth my while or Drawn and Quarterly's while, I don't think, for me to do any more of these full-length biographies for them. There's too much work. The research is just unbelievable. But
I read them all, Pete. I read them all and enjoyed them a lot. I thought Woman Rebel was my favorite of the 3, though, for sure. Like the character herself, I thought it was a very compelling and interesting story and a take on somebody who I'd heard and known more about. But you talked about so many things I didn't know about that character. There's so many misconceptions about Sanger.
Oh yeah, there sure is. But meanwhile, for the last, starting about a year ago, pretty much by the time I finished that Credo, which was the last bio book I did for Drawn and Quarterly. Since then, I've just been doing these short 4-page bio strips for Reason magazine. So the plan is every 3 or 4 times a year, there'll be like a short little biographical strip. Right now I'm doing one on Thoreau. It tends to be, it could be any time in history, but I tend to be focusing on people who are political theorists, political philosophers.
Yeah.
So anybody that since Reason magazine is a libertarian magazine, anybody who a libertarian could sink his or her teeth into or have some innate interest in the person.
What I really liked about those books is you could see the libertarian kind of connections to those characters in their philosophies, but it wasn't like a heavy-handed treatise on like libertarian doctrine or anything like that. It was just really just talking about the struggle for freedom that those people had, and it's. Oh,
you mean like with the Drawn and Quarterly books? Yeah. With both Fire, which is about the author Zora Neale Hurston, and Credo, which is about the author Rose Wilder Lane. Those 2 women were total unabashed libertarians, even though that term didn't really exist at the time. Although apparently Lane coined the term, but they very much. A lot of people seem like they don't want to believe that about Zora Neale Hurston. It's like they're like, well, there's a caricature of a libertarian as being a bunch of white guys, greedy white guys. She's a black woman, and they can't fathom a black woman being a libertarian. But there are a lot of them, and she most certainly is one of them. Was one of them. Sanger in her youth, for the first half of her life, she was a hardcore socialist. She was a very powerful believer and supporter of the socialist cause. At a certain point, she just stuck to her birth control agenda and pretty much became apolitical, or just like whatever works. I'll work with anybody. I'll deal with anybody just to further my cause.
Yeah, it's probably more widely known, but I didn't realize that the founder essentially of Planned Parenthood was anti-abortion. That was a mind blower to me when it.
Well, it wasn't that shocking. Abortion was illegal back then. She died in 1966, and then Roe v. Wade was 1973. So it didn't, at least nationwide, it didn't become legal until 7 years after she died. So it wasn't really an issue. It wasn't something that her or the board of Planned Parenthood sat around talking about. It was a non-starter, partly because it was illegal. Of course, when Sanger started out, almost like all birth control was officially illegal. So her whole career was just baby steps. This, at least, it was always like baby. Well, okay, well, just married women, and married women can only use this type.
Yeah.
So you would think, somebody might think, well, all of that must have been leading up to the legalization of abortion. And people, when that book came out, the question I got the most was, when people would read it and realize that she was against abortion, they'd say, well, if she was alive now, don't you think she would be? And I have no idea, but she certainly had expressed strong feelings about it back then. She called it killing. She just would describe it as killing. And part of the reason a big reason why she was so determined to make birth control legal and available, safe and available, is so that women wouldn't have to have abortions.
Yes.
That was the whole idea.
Yes. I mean, I don't know. I don't have a problem with abortion. I think it should be legal, of course. So just libertarian principles tell me, like, if it happened to me, of course, I would want a choice of what happens to my body, right? Like, that's a pretty straightforward thing.
I'm pro-choice myself. Although it's funny. That's not lots of times, not just me, but like everybody that works for Reason Magazine, people will often ask us, what's the libertarian stance on abortion? And the answer is there isn't one. There are people who are libertarian, but that's very personal. And even like the editorial staff of Reason Magazine, the people who work there, they're all over the map on the issue. The managing editor is pro-choice, but her assistant is pro-life. It's
actually really interesting. I'm sorry. Oh, sorry about that. It's very interesting that people see libertarianism as sort of like this monolithic thing when there are so many different stripes and pieces within it. And especially like I've become very disillusioned with sort of the corporatist strictly economic libertarian strain. But I very strongly believe in like personal liberty and freedoms and those sort of things. But I feel like they've used that as a cloak for corporatism, like to just to allow like cronyism at the highest level.
Oh, no. Well, first of all, without exception, every libertarian that I know personally is 100% opposed to cronyism and corporate welfare, completely against it. All of that stuff, it's like, and I myself, I couldn't be more against it. It's one of the biggest reasons that I am a libertarian. It's one of the reasons that I can't stand any of these politicians, the Democrats and Republicans. Like I remember like a long time ago, somebody said, well, libertarian, isn't that the party that supports corporate welfare? And I said, no, that's Democrats and Republicans. Right. They're the ones that are unabashedly but everybody votes for them. Right now, everybody I know, all my so-called liberal friends, they're all out there voting for Biden at the same time pretending that they're against corporate welfare. Biden is all about corporate welfare. So is Harris. So is Trump. All of them. Every single one of them. That's who they're all voting for right now. They're all voting for corporate welfare and cronyism and corruption. It's all corruption, and they're voting for it. Yeah,
I'm voting for Joe. I voted for Joe Jorgensen. How about you?
Yeah, no, I voted for her, and she's against it. She's against all of that stuff, and that's why I voted.
Yeah, exactly.
For her. I mean, it's easy for me. Of course, it's like if I had to choose between the two flaming assholes, I'd pick Biden over Trump, only just to swap out the assholes and see how the other one pans out.
Yeah, I just go anybody who thinks Joe Biden. I mean, come on, the guy's from the senator from Delaware. That alone tells you that the corporate interests are super strong. Just that he's from Delaware. And if you look at everything he did with credit card companies and student loans and so many things.
His legislative history is a horror show. Like all these people are out there. All these people are out there protesting against police brutality. He was one of the main architects of all of that. He brags about it. And yet the same people who are protesting all that stuff, protesting what happened to George Floyd, they are now lining up to vote for the guy that authored the bills that made that possible. You know, it's total insanity. Anyhow, what I was going to say really quickly is I do have the luxury of living in Washington State, just like you in California. Biden's going to win it. There's no doubt.
Exactly.
So it's easy for me to do my protest vote. You know, I don't have to sit worrying if I don't vote for Biden, Trump might win. No, it doesn't. It really doesn't matter. Biden has my state sewn up, so yeah, I could go and vote for Jorgensen, who actually.
But I'll tell you this, Pete. The criticisms, the legitimate criticism we're discussing about Biden right now, it would be really hard to come out and say those in the last couple of weeks. Like, say, just put them on Facebook. You're going to get accused of whatever you're going to get accused of, right? Like, it's not a fun time to have strong opinions.
It's always been this way, though. I don't know. Maybe like right now, it's pretty amped up, and with the COVID lockdown, it just gives everybody way too much time to dwell and stew about all of this stuff, and it's making everyone. It's literally making everyone crazy. But I mean, this has always been very heated, and I've always had, friends of mine who get, especially during presidential election years, they get very invested in one or the other major candidates, usually Democrats, and they get really upset with me and accuse me of all kinds of things that aren't even remotely true, just because I won't get behind somebody like Biden or Clinton. Oh, it's just so depressing. Well, I can't believe we're talking about this.
It is. I know. Well, today's the day, right? So we got choices to make tonight. Let's vote for some harm reduction, I guess, if nothing else. That's the best that we can do.
That sounds good. De-escalation.
And let's all make like Buddy Bradley. I go back to my very, very, very favorite panel of my favorite character from my favorite comic, from my favorite cartoonist, which is when Buddy decides to take a bottle of liquor. I don't even drink. But he takes it and he curls up in the corner with some comics, and he says, "I'm just reading comics from here on out. I'm dropping out. I'm going to read comics, and that's it." So,
okay,
that's my advice. That's my advice to the world.
Peter
Bagge, thank you for coming in. I want to just bring up. I want to real quickly. We've just got a few comments from people who watched. I'm just going to put them up on the screen because we like to do that. You don't even have to be a hardcore Beach Boys guy to hate Mike Love. That's for sure.
I love Mike Love. I love all the Beach Boys. I think Mike Love is terrific. I wrote an essay once defending him. I mean, I'm not in denial. I'm fully aware of all of his shortcomings, but I still like him a lot. Beach Boys.
Peter Bagge doesn't hate Love. Peter Bagge doesn't hate Mike Love. Okay, great.
No, I love Mike Love.
Hope everyone's having a great day. Mr. Show was so good, no doubt about it. Still one of my favorites. Did you see the remake, with Bob and David on Netflix?
Yes.
That they did?
Yes.
I enjoyed that as well.
Yeah. No, two of the funniest people that ever lived.
I believe it's Tomine. I don't know, because they showed 5 different ways to pronounce it in here. And every time somebody pronounces it to him, he goes,
I think that's right.
Actually,
I know the E is like that little nah.
Nah. It's
a baby syllable.
All right, and we'll go out on this one. Peter's a living legend. Great to see him on. Peter, you are a legend. We didn't even talk about so many great things you've done.
I have to say, I always quote the Pete Townsend of The Who. Somebody once called him a living legend, and he said, "Don't call me a living legend." And the person said, "Why not?" And he goes, "That just means nobody buys your records anymore."
Well,
so I was like, that just means nobody buys my comics anymore.
No, Pete. Everybody wants your comics.
There you go.
Everybody watches this show anyway. They're going to go out and they're going to buy this Complete Hate. They're going to go get the Complete Neat stuff. They're going to get Peter Bagge's other stuff. They're going to get your Reason Magazine stuff. They're going to search out Screw Magazine. That's my new challenge.
They're in for a treat if they do that.
I'm going to hunt for dirty copies of newsprint pornography just so I can see your cartoons. I want to thank you so much for coming on. I hope you'll be willing to come back again if you ever have anything to promote.
Sure. No, it's always fun. No, great to talk to you, Dan. All right.
Take care, Peter.
Bye-bye.
Okay. I'll see you around. Bye-bye. Yeah. Okay, folks. That was Peter Bagge. You can see there's a reason why he's my favorite cartoonist. No pun intended about Reason Magazine, that is. Because man, not only is there a breadth of material, we got fiction, we got nonfiction, we got journalism, but always wacky fun and world-class cartooning. And that's what we're all about here on Comic Book News. So if you've got comic books that you would like to show, man, we got to see the $1 Million Comics Cam today. So if you would like to see your comics on the $1 Million Comics Cam, all you got to do is mail them to Comic Book News with Dan Shaheen, P.O. Box 1163, Arcata, California, 95518. Put them in there. Put a little note. Put a link to your website. We'll put them up on the camera. We will talk about them in depth. I'll tell you everything great and everything that I think maybe you could improve. So make sure to send those in, because I go to my P.O. box every day, and nothing excites me more than free comics. Folks, I got to get out of here. It's time for me to get back to my day job, but I want you to make sure to go out there and buy anything you can from Peter Bagge, because you're not going to be disappointed. And stick around for the closing credits. We're going to have a little cameo at the end. I might have already shown it already today accidentally, but whatever. We'll see you when? Next time.
One step, two step, talk about a new step. It's the Murray Wilson Show.
Murray Wilson, rock and roll dad.
I'm a genius too, you know.